Welcome, everybody. David, Anthony, Mark, Joan, Dave, Anne, Beth, Matthew, Kevin, Sid, Alma, Brian, Elisa. Various people still connecting to audio whose names I don't know. Stephanie's just joining us. Or Solia. Welcome, everybody. It's really lovely to see everybody. So I think I'm going to kick us off. My name's Sarah Bird. I'm the commissioning editor for community development at Policy Press. And it's my great honor to chair this our first ever participatory online book launch. We've had a lot of participatory book launches in the past, but they usually involve lots of glasses of wine. So I'm very sad that this one is not going to involve glasses of wine, but we will involve you. So in as far as the technology permits. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please keep on mute unless you're wanting to say something. Please keep your video on unless you would prefer not to be seen. Just to note, we are going to be recording, we are already recording this launch, and it will be put on YouTube afterwards. So if you prefer not to be seen, please just close your video, your camera. We will be offering all participants a discount of 50% on the book, which I happily have here with me. We'll share the code for that to happen in the chat towards the end of our time together. And if you have any technical issues, please do use the chat, and my colleague Angela will do her best to help you. Angela is Bristol University Press on your screen. So now that we're gathering a good few folk, more people joining all the time, which is great. I'm going to a few words about how the launch today is going to work. In a few minutes, I will introduce Margaret, Ledwith and Jane Springett, who are going to have a conversation about the main themes of the book, then invite you in turn to have a 10-minute discussion in a breakout room in response to some prompts from them. We'll then call you all back in for Margaret and Jane to continue their conversation, and introduce a second theme to discuss in a second breakout room slot, and we'll keep you in the same small groups. We'll then all come back together at the end for a final short harvesting session, which will be a chance to extend the dialogue into the group as a whole, if there are points to be made or questions to be asked. If you have any comments and questions over the next hour, please, rather than speaking them out loud, pop them in the chat, and then Jane will manage these in the final session. Now to introduce the book. Here it is again, and its authors. In all my time as an editor here at Policy Press, I have never known such an eagerly awaited second edition. The original edition came out in 2009. I won't ask how many of you remember that. And readers across many domains of practice with the communities welcomed the way that Margaret and Jane built on participatory theories of action and offered a range of practical examples, theory and practice linked throughout. The new edition remains unique in its approach, but is more relevant now than ever. Why is that? Because the context in which the practices in this book are set has changed massively. We all know this. Facing multiple crises at a global level, environmental, social, political, and amongst these interlocking crises, we're facing a profound crisis of democracy. So this is why we need this book. It comes to play its part in enabling the voices and the stories of individuals to be surfaced and heard the world over, to counterbalance with creativity these multiple threats to our democracies, and to create new narratives to counter the destructive ones. And both authors have worked tirelessly to promote participation and community engagement in many domains, and have dedicated themselves to the cause through their research and writing. So without further ado, it's my huge pleasure to welcome Jane Springett, but first of all, Margaret Ledwith, to start our conversation today. And you're on mute, Margaret.
Right, is that better? Yeah, loud and clear. I'm Margaret, talking to you from Lancaster, Northwest UK. And what a pleasure it is to be part of a participatory book launch, one which is about exploring how to think and how to be. So in this spirit, we offer the event as a mutual conversation, sharing key themes from the book, themes dear to both our hearts, and those which have led us to write this second edition. Let's start the conversation with Gramsci's notion of the interregnum, a space in which the old is dying and the new cannot yet be born, a space in which, he said, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. And hey, sure enough, we're drowning in crises, drowning in morbid symptoms. An alarming rise of fascist capitalism, a pandemic, the rich getting richer as the poor get poorer, environmental degradation, climate change, inequalities fueled by escalations of racism, hatred of immigrants, violence against women and girls, on and on. But a world in crisis is an opportunity for change, which is why this book emphasizes praxis, not only how to think about what's happening, but how to change what's happening for the better, all beginning in grassroots practice. Critique is essential for change. Without analyses of power, there is no social justice. It's the only way to understand the impact of political times on personal lives, exposing neoliberal capitalism's intention to exploit. Our critique reveals that it's futile to attempt to tackle one source of discrimination, say racism, when all forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, disableism, homophobia, ageism, environmental degradation, all are interlinked in one blanket oppression as part of this corrupt ideology. But critique is only part of the process, the start. It's absolutely no good critiquing what exists without having something to put in its place. And we've failed miserably to come up with a new story, one founded on values of participation. In fact, we seem trapped in a state of inertia, lacking the curiosity and imagination to see that a new world is not only possible, but urgent. This raises the question of participation as a democratic principle, not tokenism, but as a political ideology at the heart of participatory democracy. Taking ideas into action, our work's founded on Paulo Freire's education for critical consciousness. This gets us to the heart of praxis, ideas in action and ideas from action. Praxis involves setting the context for critical dialogue so that people see everyday contradictions. We explore ways in which people's minds have been colonized by ideas that use stigma politics to dehumanize targeted social groups, with the aim of increasing, not eliminating, poverty. Evidence is all around us if we open our eyes. The destitute swept onto the streets in rich countries, queues at food banks, hungry children at school, all part and parcel of a huge neoliberal success story. And to dismantle this destructive dominant narrative, there needs to be a counter-narrative, a story of connection, of compassion to put in its place. Stories are transformative. They change the world, exciting curiosity and imagination, inspiring hope for a different world, for a new future. This is the foundation of transformative practice. Over to you, Jane.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane and I have spent the last 10 years or so in Canada, but I'm now talking to you from North Cumbria. I'd like to pick up what Margaret's saying about the issue of achieving change for the better. And we argue in the book that this can be achieved by authentic participatory practice. The emphasis is on authentic participatory practice. And since we wrote the first edition, there's been an upsurge in the adoption of the idea of participation in a range of sectors and organisations. But a lot of this is what we would call participatory greenwash, a bit like eco-greenwash or greenwash generally. And to engage in what we describe in the book as participatory practice requires a fundamental change in the way we do things. But it also requires a fundamental change in the way you look at the world and experience the world, because how you think about the world influences the way you act in the world. Now, I'm grateful, and I see some of my Canadian friends and colleagues here. I'm very grateful that while I was working in Canada, I learned a lot about participation, and in particular about Indigenous ways of working, and also the challenges of reconciling those ways of thinking about the world with the dominant Western mindset and way of acting in the world. And in this book, we draw some parallels between Indigenous ways of viewing the world and contemporary ecological and systems ways of viewing the world. A key element of which is that everything is interconnected. Everything is connected in some way or another. And that we can't always see those connections, or we're not always aware of those connections, but we have to think about the world as interconnected. Because as Margaret Wheatley says, everything comes into form because of relationships. So it's about relationships. Relationships are key to this. She says, if we're interested in effecting change, it is crucial to remember we're working with a range of a web of relations, not machines. And central to this different mindset is that you have to adopt a fundamental set of principles and values to guide the way you practice. And it's through these principles and values that you live and act in the world. And with these core values at the centre, the three dimensions of participatory practice, which we dig deep into in the book, the use of story, the use of dialogue, and the use of critical reflection, shape community-based action, and together have the potential to lead to transformation. And so the idea is, if we reframe our thinking, we start to reframe our practice. And yes, we do explore a range of tools by which to do that. And some of which I've learned experienced while I've been in Canada. But it's the essence of participatory practice is how we relate to each other and the nature of those relationships between each other and also with nature, so that we can co-create a new future. So it's a heart-centered approach. One of the metaphors we use in the book is about the garden. And I'm currently developing a garden in the new place I'm living with my partner and adopting a regenerative and permaculture approach. So it's not just about designing whether something is pretty there, but it's about being at one with nature and working with nature. The idea is to bring the ecology of the garden into balance while at the same time providing us with food. So at the moment, I'm getting to know what's already there, mostly a desert or lawn, but anyway, we won't go down that route. And I'm paying attention to how local nature works and trying things out and seeing what the results are, and then seeing what works and what doesn't work, and always asking the question, why? And those questions are based in part by the theory, which is permaculture, but also by what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing and experiencing. And I'm learning that it's not a quick garden fix. It's actually an action research process that takes time, as we talk about in the book. And to quote Wall, whose book on designing regenerative cultures has many parallels with their own, and I read to it when he's talking about theory and practice. Should we not pay attention to asking the right questions rather being obsessed with quick solutions? Equally, in favouring practice over theory, are we not demonstrating how we have become blind to the fact that any practical action is based on our ideas and beliefs about the world, whether we are conscious of them or not? The separation of theory and practice is false. They are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. We cannot act wisely without making sense of the world. And making sense of the world is in itself a profoundly practical action that informs how we experience reality, how we act, and the relationships we form. Without questioning our worldview and that narrative that has shaped our culture, are we not likely to repeat the same mistakes over and over again? And as Margaret has shown, theory is as important as the action through praxis. So over back to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Jane. And so, in these ways, this book is about thinking differently and doing things differently. It's about a participatory paradigm shift and creative, imaginative approaches to grassroots practice. And it involves questioning what's going on, making connections, creating counter-narratives, and importantly, acting together for a fairer and more just future. And it all begins with the question, are we asking the right questions? So at this point, I'd like you to pause. Take time for thoughts to catch up with words as I introduce you to one of the reflections from the book. Take a few seconds to imagine a new world, a world you'd be proud to live in, a place where you'd flourish, be fully human, be able to give of your very best to society. What would this world look like in reality? How are people living? What's important to them? Hold on to these pictures in your mind's eye as my ideas unfold. I'll take you on a journey of consciousness, emphasizing values as the lens through which we see the world. They're embedded in the stories we tell, and they create the reality of our everyday lives. And so imagine a counter-narrative of kindness, a story underpinning a just society, a story evoking hope that such a world's possible, a story powerful enough to dislodge the dominant narrative of disconnection and greed, but one based on the connected knowledge, often found, as Jane said, in wisdoms subordinated under the weight of the neoliberal story. For example, think Ubuntu, the African wisdom. Based on values of connection, it sees being fully human as being part of a bigger whole, in community, in society, in the ecosystem, and in the spiritual world. In other words, my humanity is inextricably part of yours. So we see each other, those we know and strangers, those from different cultures, different places, as fully human. And so we reach out with compassion and friendship, aware of our interconnection. Imagine how these different values would create a different world. So in the spirit of the book, let's co-create knowledge together. This is the point at which we invite you to dialogue in your breakout groups. And to start the process going, we'd like to ask you to consider how you would set the context for dialogue in community groups in a way that would excite the imagination and stimulate curiosity for change. So let's imagine a new story. I hope that was fun, everybody. I hope that was good to get to grips with some ideas. For us, Making Critical Connections exposes escalations in poverty, violence, mental ill health as political choices, not inevitable, inflicted on the people by an ideology that trades in hatred. Using values of disconnection, individual greed, privatization of the common good, and thought control, all designed to benefit the privileged at the expense of the poor and the planet. We believe it's time for a change. And this book is all about how to participate in change for the better, a change in values. Over to you, Jane.
Yes, and one of the challenges we explore in the book is the whole issue of participatory practice in a non-participatory world. Many of the institutions and organisational systems that were quite often set up in the late 19th and earlier 20th century, and they're not set up to work with systems thinking and ecological thinking. And you can easily fall back into hierarchy and the norms of hierarchy in ways of working. We had the problem in trying to set this up. I mean, you were all dragged back from your conversations, whether you'd liked it or not, because the system did that to you and drew you back. And with book launches, there is a normal way of doing these things. And we tried to think of a way to engage participation in a book launch and was finding it equally challenging. But the question is, how do we break out of that and encourage a new participatory way? And we have to look not how we organise things, but also on what language we use to express things. And there's an illustration of what we're talking about, which is ably produced by Beth Sanders, who wrote the book Nest City. And Beth is here, and I'd like to acknowledge her because this is an illustration from the book, which I've taken from one of her blogs, where she illustrates the difference between a system where there's not a dialogue, where there's information sharing, which is what I'm doing now. There's a system where you can broadcast, where individuals will speak to each other in podcasts and things. And then there's gathering, where there's a group that comes together with a host. And one moves us from telling, which is what you broadcast doing, or with the traditional way, to exploring. And really what we're trying to do is to help you in this way to explore. And the challenge is how do we explore, as we indicated, in dialogue, open dialogue with dignity and respect, deep listening, creating a safe space to ask questions and reflect. And as we said, and we're emphasizing again, it's the importance of the relational in this. Relationships are the center of everything, and we're hardwired actually to care for others and to be part of the living system, to interconnect. Over to you, Margaret.
What I'd like to say at this point is I feel inspired and excited by the fact that we already have a wealth of practices for achieving change in place around the world, such as universal basic income, being tested with very positive results in many countries, and with the capacity to end world poverty. Plus, and this excites me tremendously because I'm constantly being told that humans are naturally greedy and selfish, but there are new developments in neuroscientific research proving that human beings are not naturally greedy. We've got an empathy circuit in our brains, signifying beyond doubt that we need to be kind and compassionate in order to be fully human. This means, of course, that we're living in a system that has values that are the complete counter to this, the antithesis of this. And this is why so many of us are becoming ill, and escalations in suicide and all the sort of morbid symptoms I started on in the beginning. Over to you, Jane.
So with this in mind, we've gone to the second dialogue with what I'm going to do is read a quote from the book, which comes at the end of the first chapter. And we make a statement. And it's quite a profound statement. Participatory practice is the future without which there is no future. It means paying lip service to participation, not only paying lip service to participation, but a total regenerative transformation underpinned by the values of love. Now, using that word love, sometimes it brings discomfort in people, but here we're not talking about romantic love. We're talking about a fundamental principle of love from the heart-centered relationships with people and the world. And so we're talking about empathy and kindness and those elements, which are not often talked about in textbooks. It's thought to be a non-thing for academics to talk about those things. And what we thought it might be interesting is for you to return to your groups and to continue the conversation with that statement in mind. And the question we're starting off with is, how do you react to a statement like that?
Wonderful to see all the faces reappearing. So I'm now going to hand over to Jane to manage the harvesting session.
Yes, so if any of you've got any, one of the problems with this format is the interaction between, you can talk to each other, but we can't get any feedback from what you've been talking about. So the last section of the session is basically to get some idea of some insights that came to you in dialogue or whatever, and you can put them in the chat box, or and also if you've got something profound you want to share with the group as a whole, if you could put your thumb up, and I can try and manage it, though haven't got everybody on my screen, so I might miss you. So apologies if you haven't got anything you want to share. So, and keep it brief because we're moving on the time, but we'd like to know how it is. And they're loving the people in their groups. Anyway, that's something, and that's taking the theme of love on. It's one of the difficulties of this format is the sorts of conversations you might have don't always work. Yeah, there's quite a lot of reaction to the concept of love, feeling that that it works well on a micro scale, but the problem is macro love and love being westernized. I think if we use the word love, we tend to use it in, as you say, in a romantic love sense, rather than thinking about the kindness, the empathy, and the other aspects that care and heart-centeredness actually involves. And yes, the importance of communities of participatory practitioners to actually support and inspire each other. That is a very important thing. And also, I think one of the things that we miss is that our own self-care is as important as caring for others. And that we can't really care for others if we don't care for ourselves, if we don't love ourselves. And talking about the context of particularly the Ukraine, where you've got power without love instead of, and the love of power, if you like, which we talk about a lot in the book. And it seems to me that from what people are saying is that the care aspect and the regenerative idea seems to resonate with the people's experience in different parts of the world. And the idea of using collective care being an important part of bringing this almost return to normal that we're trying to experience, so-called normal at the moment. Thank you so much for your comments. They will be recorded in the same way as the videos being recorded, so you'll be able to see those comments. And Angela has agreed to collate all that together as you put your comments and feed them back to you, because that's the only way we can effectively do that in this context. Margaret, is there anything you want to add at all?
I'm very heartened reading all of these different comments, but I also think that juxtaposing a politics of hatred against the concept of a politics of love helps us to see what we're talking about without getting drawn into struggles with definitions of what we mean by love. Compassion, kindness, caring, connection, community. So, you know, when you set it against what is a politics of hatred, let's build walls, you know, no fascism on the rise, no immigrants here. It helps for me to juxtapose those two.
Right, to bring things to the end, what I'm going to do is read the poem that we quoted at the end of the book itself. And it seems appropriate because this poem really takes on the other aspects that we haven't looked at, which is aspects around consciousness and spirituality, which is so fundamentally part of Indigenous populations' way of viewing the world. But it came up, the poem is an unpublished poem by Ania Rosell, who has a book on liberated poetry of the feminine, but this isn't actually unpublished. And ironically, it came because she posted it on a spiritual Facebook group that I'm in, and it just resonated so much with what our book's about, which is about trying to find a counter narrative of hope and love in a world that is otherwise. But it's also appropriate because of the time of year to which it refers. So, I dug deep into my darkness, immersed myself in the suffering of humanity until I became cynical, losing hope, that the world was too broken to be healed, that kindness was too weak to overtake hatred, until I realized that we will never wipe out pain by adding to it. The solution is in finding lightness in the chaos, in shifting our perspective, to see the beauty and kindness that still surrounds us, that every spring, no matter how hopeless it feels, the world still blossoms into life regardless. And in that remembrance, I created a little bit of heaven around me by emanating the grace of faith, celebrating all the beauty that is here, slowing down to notice the little miracles that are always taking place, listening to my intuition, opening my eyes and tuning into the sweet sound of birds singing. And suddenly the world didn't seem so dark. As I saw that there is always a shimmering thread interweaving beneath, patiently waiting for us to take off the blinkers and really see the world and each other as we really are, as golden. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jane. That was a beautiful poem. And I've been really encouraged by what people have been saying about in the comments about the bravery of talking about love and spirituality and poetry in an academic book. And I thank Jane and Margaret hugely for doing that. They would, to be fair, we would have had absolutely no hope whatsoever as publishers in stopping them doing so, because they know their minds. But we encourage, and it is to break down those kind of preconceptions about what an academic book needs to be, really feels incredibly important. Gosh, thank you all so much for coming. Now, I did promise you a code, which I'm hoping that Angela is going to post in the chat as well, for 50% discount on the book, which is POD Ledwith. POD Ledwith, but I see it is now in the chat. We will also, it sounds like there's a consensus that we should share the what has been harvested with all of the participants. So we will do that after next week or whatever, this week or next week. Gosh, I'm trying to think if there's anything else practical that I need to say. And there we go. Angela is also going to send an email with the recording so that you'll be able to see it. Just to say, the recording has not, the small groups have not been recorded. It's only the whole group. So don't worry if you said anything you wouldn't have wanted to be shared in the small group, that remains private and within you. So I really hope that you've enjoyed yourselves today. Thank you so much for coming. Jane and Margaret, do you have anything to add before we say goodbye?
Just to thank everybody. It's been a wonderful experience to have a participatory book launch online in this way, a big challenge, and I feel at the end of it a huge success. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, I'd like to thank all the support workers that have come and all the Canadian friends that I can see, and thank them for all the wisdom they've shared with me over the years. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and yes, I hope it was a little different experience from what you normally get in the book launch, but we were just experimenting, and we'll get the feedback and we'll revise the way we work. And
for the 3rd edition, perhaps we'll have one in person by then. The COVID pandemic may be early, may be over.
Let's hope so.
But I think the 3rd edition might be some time away. So anyway, thank you all hugely, and I'm really, it's wonderful, very affirming to see the comments about people having enjoyed it, and I'm glad you have. Oh, there we go. People saying it's great to make some new friends. I hope that you get those you keep those friendships going. That's wonderful. So I will nothing more to do but to wish you all a very good rest of your evening, and to say thank you for coming, and very best wishes. Goodbye.